Hey guys, it's Sam. I'm doing another video here. I'm trying to do these a few times a week if I can. I feel like I've got a little bit of time, and I think it's been really good for me to be able to do these videos and get your feedback. And I've been learning a lot just watching some other people's videos in the community and with the discussions that I've had in the comments on my videos. So I'm going to keep doing those, and I appreciate you guys watching and commenting. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about sort of my RPG journey, where I am currently going, and like the journey that I'm on to sort of discover the type of gaming that I like and that I want to play. And what's very interesting is over the past couple of years, I've been really trying to play a lot of different games. I've been very fortunate to be able to get involved with several different systems, several different groups, several different play styles. And that's been really good for me because I've been able to start to realize the type of gaming that I do like and the type of gaming that I don't like. And I'm wondering if any of you guys have had a similar journey or are currently having a similar experience, and maybe what you're going through as well. So I started out basically with Vampire the Masquerade and some of the old World of Darkness, White Wolf games. That was my first introduction to role-playing. Before that, I'd played Magic the Gathering, and I'd played the Hero Quest board game, and read a lot of fantasy novels and stuff like that. But the first actual role-playing game that I played was, I think actually the first one I played was Werewolf the Apocalypse. But it was the trilogy of White Wolf games. At the time, Mage, Vampire, and Werewolf. And what was really interesting about those systems is that they're called the storyteller system, right? That's the base mechanic, the name for it. And what was cool about those games was that they really did attempt to put the characters front and center in the story, right? So that the choices that the characters made were what drove the story, okay? And I think that had a big influence on my gaming. And then what I discovered was that quickly we went over to Dungeons and Dragons. Like most people do, that's the most popular role-playing game. Most people play that game. So we did that as well. And when I first became involved with D&D, it was with 3rd edition. It was probably right around 2000, 2001, maybe, when I got involved with D&D. And I bought a couple of the 3rd edition books, and then once 3.5 came out, then I was buying, I bought those, and we played that. And I played that in high school and through college. And a couple other things as well. I played, the revised core rulebook and the Saga Edition version of Star Wars. I played some more White Wolf stuff. I think I might have played True 20 in college a little bit, but basically D20 based systems, right? That's all I knew. I mean, I didn't have, any other gaming friends at the time that were playing other things, We played a lot of Magic the Gathering, and we played those specific role-playing games. And for me, Dungeons and Dragons, D&D 3.5, just never sat well with me. I bought a lot of the books. I got pretty heavily invested into it. But it was always a big struggle for me to play that game, to run that game, because there was just too many rules, too many mechanics. And at the time, I was not a very mature role player in the sense that I didn't realize that you could just change stuff and just, make stuff up and whatever. And actually, I was doing that, but I felt weird about it because I thought that you weren't supposed to do that, that you're supposed to play by the rules. The problem was that there was a ton of rules, and I didn't want to do that. And I realized that a lot of my games were getting bogged down in the action economy of D&D 3.5. I move within my 30-foot movement radius. We take a 5-foot step, so to do this, there's an attack of opportunity. Okay, I want to use this feat to, do this, blah, blah, blah. Right? It became very much this bogged down, slow kind of boring game. And I didn't know how to change that, right? And then after college, I moved away. I hadn't discovered gaming online yet, and I didn't realize that was a thing. And so for about 7 years, I didn't play at all. And we moved back, and started a family, and I was going to a buddy's wedding, and for the bachelor party, one of the guys was like, hey, do you want to play D&D? And we were like, sure. And that didn't end up happening, but at the time, we all had the 3.5 stuff. That's what we knew. But it was right around that time that I was looking online, and I realized that there were people recording games that they were playing over, Google Hangouts or Skype or whatever. And there was a whole bunch of actual plays on YouTube. So I started watching them. And of course, one of the things I noticed was the Provokers game, run by Matt Click of A Fistful of Dice. And that showed me two things. It showed me what 5th edition D&D could be like, and also a very different style of gaming, right? It was the theater of the mind style of gaming that I liked and that I wanted to play, but not getting all bogged down in the crazy 3.5 crunch, right? It was a lot more like the White Wolf games, that I used to play, that I started with. So I got the books, and I ended up running games. I first discovered the Tabletop RPG One Shot group, which is still there. I'm still a part of that. So, if you're looking for games, that's a great group. Also, the Absolute Tabletop official group on Facebook. Both of those groups are really good. Both facilitate gaming, so you should check those out. But I started gaming online, and I was able to run 5th edition. And for a while, I was running that. That was my preferred system. I enjoyed it. But I was discovering that people in the community were also playing other games, right? They were playing games like Fate. They were playing games like Numenera. All kinds of different games, right? And so I was seeing these games being played, and this whole time I was having this same lingering feeling of discontent with 5th edition, right? Like, I was trying to like it. I was trying to really feel like, man, this is a fun game. And the games that I found were the most enjoyable were the ones that were very heavily story-based and not using a lot of the rules, right? People were basically going away from the system and really focusing more on the narrative. So I started playing other things like Dungeon World, right? And other Powered by the Apocalypse games. Fate, again, which I thought was great. I like that system a lot. The Cypher system by Monte Cook Games, starting with Numenera and then the Cypher system core rulebook, those were all games that I have played. And then I discovered Edge of the Empire, and that one freaked me out at first because it was a big book, it was expensive, the line was split into 3 different versions, they had funny dice, all the things about it, right? But a lot of people were playing it, they liked it, they said it was great, so I tried it out, and it was a lot of fun. So I got involved in that, and I really like that system. That's actually maybe right now my favorite system. Particularly Edge of the Empire, because of the narrative dice mechanic and what that does to the story. But even with Edge of the Empire, I still have issues with that system. There's a lot of crunch to it, and I'm just finding that for me, I don't want that. I don't want a lot of rules. I don't want a lot of subsystems and stuff that that I need to define, that defines and puts the box on the game, that I then have to possibly alter or adjust to fit my gaming style, right? But conversely, there's Fate, which is very open in that regard. But with Fate, it's almost the polar opposite in that you can kind of do anything that you can think of, right? And it's a lot more narrative, but the problem is that some people, including myself, can have a hard time with that free-form nature and trying to figure out how to make things work and how to without that structure, right? So that's hard as well. I think Cypher System is kind of in the middle there. It's got just enough crunch, I think, to give you a better framework, but it's also got some weird mechanics that can sometimes be tricky to figure out how to play at the table. I still love it. I love the system a lot, but anyway. So I've been thinking a lot about what I want to do, and increasingly I've been on YouTube and talking to other people, seeing games, you know, in the OSR movement, right? The old school Renaissance or revival or whatever you want to call it. Basically the oldest editions of D&D. And as much as I love sci-fi, and sci-fi gaming is currently what I'm mostly running, I started out with fantasy. Like, I like fantasy. I enjoy it. Even trope fantasy I can get on board with. Sometimes, because I think that you make your own stories, and it's unique in the sense that your group is going to tell a different story than another group, even if you're going through the same module or same premise, right? So, you know, I've been thinking, okay, I want to run some more fantasy gaming. Do I go with Dungeon World, for example, right? Because Dungeon World is great. It's a cool system. It's very freeform, very open. Really puts the narrative up front. It's got a little less structure. And what I found is that some people in the community have a hard time with Dungeon World because, again, it's asking the players to basically be like a co-GM, right? They have a lot of narrative agency. They've got a lot of storytelling responsibilities. And a lot of players, myself included, love that, right? They relish that, they thrive under that type of system. But some don't, right? Some people really find that lack of cohesive structure can pull them out of the game, right? Can pull them out of the immersion, that they kind of want to experience the GM's world and have just a little bit of input themselves. And the other thing that interests me about that system, and that I'm having a hard time understanding how I feel, is while I like the ability to have a collective story, right, where we're all playing to find out what happens, and I don't necessarily know what's going to happen, that's not how I'm trained to do it, right? D&D trained me to think and to structure adventures in a very certain way. And so it's hard for me to get away from that because that's what I'm used to doing. And I kind of like the structure, but I just don't like all the rules, right? And so lately with 5e, I've been having a really hard time finding enjoyment in that system. And I think, an example of that, might be as follows, right? So like when you're in a 5th edition party, let's say you have your standard adventuring party, right? Your first level, you have a wizard, a cleric, a fighter, and a rogue, right? You go into a dungeon and you encounter, 6 or 8 kobolds, okay? And they're guarding some kind of treasure or whatever. In 5th edition D&D, you are not worried by that encounter at all, okay? Because the fighter is going to just rush in, right? Sword and shield or whatever, weapons he or she might have, go right at the kobolds, right? He's not going to stand back and stand in defense of the wizard because he doesn't have to, right? Because the wizard most likely has, burning hands or some kind of cantrip and D6 hit dice that means that, and plus all characters in 5e start out with max hit points at first level. So, the wizard isn't fragile like they were in the OSR. They are much more capable. And if a kobold gets near them, chances are they're going to be able to take it out, right? The cleric is going to be almost as prodigious a fighter as the fighter himself, and will be able to wade into combat no problem. And with the rogue, all they need is an ally within 5 feet of an enemy to take advantage of their sneak attack, right? And they get that at first level. So, you've got 4 highly competent, highly capable, combat machines, where these kobolds, goblins, orcs, whatever, they're not much of a threat. Okay. And to me, you look at that, and then you look down at your character sheet, and you've got so many different things, right? There's all these different abilities that you have. When you get to third level, it's even crazier, right? I mean, an example I keep using was I was playing I think I was playing a third level Tabaxi Spellless Ranger in a game, and we were, third level, and I'm staring down at like 9 different abilities or things on my character sheet that I have to keep track of at third level, right? And to me, that's very limiting. You would think that, wow, you got all this stuff, you're very capable, you can do a lot of stuff, right? But what I'm constantly doing is looking down at my character sheet and saying, well, what abilities can I use? How can I use these abilities to get the most out of my character? Okay, and that's very distracting because what that's doing is that's pulling me out of the game, that's pulling me out of the narrative, because I'm trying to see what I can do. And that's not how I want to play D&D, right? And I advise players don't do that, right? Like, you can do anything you want to do, it's just how you go about doing it, right? So I picked up some systems like White Box fantasy adventure game, medieval or fantastic medieval adventure game based on Swords and Wizardry White Box, which was based on OD&D, and Basic Fantasy RPG, and I've downloaded a couple other PDFs of various, 0 edition, 1st edition retro clones, right? And looking at we'll go with Basic Fantasy as an example. The fighter in Basic Fantasy has no special abilities. All they can do is wear any armor and use any weapon that they want. They have higher hit dice than the rest of the party. And that's it, right? The cleric cannot cast spells until 2nd level. They are limited in the weapons that they can use. They can use any armor they want, whatever. The wizard, oh my god, the wizard has D4 hit dice and 1 spell at 1st level, right? And then the thief has a bunch of thief abilities, and they have their backstab ability, but I think they still even have D4 or D6 hit dice. So, and they're very, very squishy, right? I mean, you can have 1 hit point. So, this is a system where in that same scenario, that adventuring party is going to look at those 8 kobolds a whole lot differently. Chances are those 8 kobolds are going to have a very hard time hitting the fighter because, the fighter will probably be in plate armor and a shield. So they'll have probably a 16, 17, 18 armor class right away. That's going to be hard to hit, right? The cleric won't be able to turn undead because they're not undead, and he doesn't have any spells to use. So, what is he going to do? Well, maybe he wades into combat. The wizard, God, hopefully he took a sleep spell because otherwise he's not going to be of much use. He's not going to want to get in there with a staff and try to fight these things because 1 hit from these kobolds on an unarmored wizard and he's done, right? And the thief, well, yeah, the thief could backstab, but at the same time, if the thief comes in and, uses his backstab, maybe he takes 1 of them out. But then again, all it's going to take is 1 or 2 hits on the thief and he could be dead as well, right? So they don't have tons and tons of abilities, right? They've just got their wits and they've got a few things that they can do. The game is a lot deadlier and the stakes are a lot higher. And something about that is really calling to me. It's really drawing me. I think the ability for me as a game master to be able to say, look, we don't have a ton of rules. We don't have a ton of abilities. What we're going to do is we're going to play this game. And I'm going to make rulings as I see fit because, we're serving the adventure, we're serving the fiction, right? The rules are here for the GM to help frame how this game works, but the rules are ultimately for the GM and not the player. That's how the old school Renaissance kind of frames it and looks at it, right? Because there aren't a lot of rules. So you as a character, you're not worried about 5-foot steps and about, how your action surge works and how, whatever. Like you as a cleric, yeah, maybe you want to know how turn undead works, but basically all you got to do is say you're going to turn undead, and then there's tables to tell you the amount of hit dice that will be turned and what the effect is, right? You know, things like surprise, things like being, you know, listening at a door, those are rolled by the DM so as to, you know, keep it secret. Like, do you succeed, thief, at hiding? Well, you're not rolling a d20 as the player and knowing whether or not you've successfully hidden. The GM rolls the dice. You think as the character that you're successful. And then you find out whether or not you were, as the GM describes it, based on what they rolled as the dice, right? So, I don't know. There's something about that. Like, I'm coming back to these systems where the stakes are higher. You know, Star Wars RPGs like that. Surprisingly, as crunchy as it is and as competent as your characters are starting out, you get taken out in 2 hits in a combat, right? Like, it's very deadly. And you don't get, I mean, you don't progress much in that game in that regard. You might have talents, you might have better skills, you might be able to do a better job at, you know, dishing out damage or preventing combat from happening. But man, you know, a squad of stormtroopers at starting level is still as deadly as a squad of stormtroopers at 200 XP, you know? Like, it's deadly. You got to be really careful. You got to be really smart, right? So I like that. I like the game not relying on diplomacy as a D20 roll, or, you know, not relying on sense motive, you know, as you just roll a dice and determine what happens, right? Like, I like the idea of making the player role play that, right? And, you know, for me, I think that my understanding of it is that, you know, you try to give the benefit of the doubt to the player, like, but at the same time, I feel like something like sense motive is the most, to me, I hate that skill. I do not think that should be a mechanical thing, because it doesn't ever make sense to me. Like, if the guard is lying to you, well, what do you think as the player? Do you think the guard is lying? You don't know in real life. Nobody really knows that. Yes, there are some people that are trained in spotting deception and whatever, but that's something that you could do through role play. You know, you could say, well, okay, I want to look at the guard and I want to see if I can tell any, you know, signs of him being or her being deceptive. You know, are his eyes darting away? You know, is his story consistent? What, you know, this, that, and the other. By asking those questions of the GM, as opposed to just skipping over it in a die roll, I think that's more fun. I also think the tension of resource management in the OSR games can be really fun as well. You know, you going out into the wilderness and not knowing if you're going to have enough food and water to survive. You know, you going into a dungeon and having to worry about your torch burning out and then being stuck in this dungeon in the pitch dark. There's tension there, right? And if done well, if run well by the GM, that is an element of the game, I think, that can be really fun, and is not an element that you see very often in modern gaming, right? You know, encumbrance and resource management just aren't used very much in 5e. Some people would say that's because they're sort of boring and needless, and they detract from the story. And I used to think that as well, but I guess I'm just finding that maybe I want that in my games. So, I don't know. I think I've rambled on long enough, but it's very interesting to me that I am starting to really dig the OSR, and I think I'm going to be running some games there in the future. So anyway, keep an eye out for those. Let me know if you'd be interested in playing those games. Let me know what your thoughts are on what you really look for and crave in a game these days, what you find that you like, what you find that you don't like, and if you are the kind of person who's found your sort of perfect system, or if you really prefer to jump from system to system because you get those perspectives and those experiences, and that's what you enjoy. So anyway, happy gaming.